John Sarianides, and as always, I'm joined by my partners, John Lyons and Jake Hamilton. Gentlemen, how are you on this Tuesday evening?
Doing well, and after about 6 months, guys, the draft is finally
It's over.
over. So
It's
finally,
over.
it is done.
Yeah, even though it seems like it's the end of a long process, it's just the beginning for a lot of these rookies that the Patriots have brought in.
So I think what we should do now is rehash the process.
Yeah, right.
And talk about the draft, because what the hell else are we going to do now that you could say that football season is kind of sort of over. I mean, now we've definitely turned the page to 2024, but certainly an interesting weekend. More than the draft, though. I mean, you also have the big news yesterday, and that's where we're going to start with Christian Barmore signing a 4-year, $90 million extension. $41.8 million of that is guaranteed. And look, we've been talking about this for weeks, that it was a possibility. It finally came to fruition. Barmore signs his extension. Just some thoughts on that news yesterday.
Yeah, I was ecstatic when I saw the extension there. Remember, this is a young player. He came out of college young. Even if he's here this whole time, through the whole extension, I think he's only going to be 28 at the end of it. So you're going to get him throughout his prime years and maybe even beyond that if he continues to stay here. And this is an elite defensive tackle, right? I know when we think of the Patriots over the last couple of years, we think of back-to-back losing seasons and a bad offense, and I get it. This defense has been really good, and he's been arguably the best player on this defense over the last couple of years. I know a couple of years ago he had some health issues. I get it, but last year, fully healthy, he was a dominant force for this defense. I mean, he's excellent in the passing game as a pass rusher, but he's gotten better and better as a run defender. And you look at some of the other defensive tackle contracts that were given out over the last couple of months. I mean, he comes in, more affordable than those guys, and I think he's just as good, if not better, of a player. So I like this deal a lot. I mean, this is what you want to do. You have a great young player that you drafted and developed. Keep him around long term, especially at a position like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice for the Patriots to have someone that it feels like they can really sort of build along with that defensive line. I think that he's a great signing for them. I think as much as Patriots fans are probably sick about talking about value contracts, given the way that the cap is going to explode over the next couple of years, this is going to be a really affordable deal. And it means that in the future, if there are guys who kind of pop like Keon White along the defensive line and, some of these other guys that they brought in, I think it's going to be a good deal for them pretty long term. And yeah, even though he's had his injury history, I think that especially with Mayo taking over, I think we might see a little like that. He's only played, I think, 44 games in 3-ish years for them. So I still think there's a lot of untapped potential there. And I think it's just nice to have someone that, when we talk about, you got to build around the quarterback, he's the guy I think around the defense you're going to want to start to build around. And so I think it helps bring direction to where this defense is going to go in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think when you look at defensively, I mean, he's part of a talented core. And when we think long term, who are they going to want to build around? It's going to be him. It's going to be Gonzalez. It's going to be these edge rushers. I mean, they brought back Joshua Uche, who now goes by Joshua, as he announced today, but he's only back on a 1-year deal. But if he has a good year, he made it clear today. He reiterated what he said when he re-signed, that he wants to be here long term. He could be a part of that conversation. Certainly, Judon, whose contract comes up after next year, he could continue to be a part of that core. But you've got a nice nucleus there now with those two guys, Barmore, Gonzalez, Keon White, I think, figures into that nucleus.
Kyle Duggar
too. So that's a nice core right there. Even if you don't include Judon, those 4 guys, that's a pretty nice core right there on defense that you can build around. And then on offense now, you can build around Drake May. So I think they're heading in the right direction. And I don't think this is going to be a long rebuild. And the more you see what they've done this offseason, the more I like it. I don't know how you guys feel. Now that we've been through free agency and the draft, I think that their vision is clearer, and I like what they've done. You can clearly see what they've done. They placed the emphasis in free agency on their defense, keeping their own guys. They feel that what they have defensively is going to allow them to be competitive, and they use the draft to start to rebuild the offense. I'm pretty happy with it, to be honest with you. I think that their plan is finally starting to come to focus now.
Yeah, and I mean, it's been a seismic offseason, right? You get rid of the best head coach of all time. You also, though, get rid of your offensive coordinator, most of your offensive staff. You turn over several pieces on that offensive side of the ball, personnel-wise as well. And if you look at where they've kind of come, I think for the most part, like you can feel good. You can feel really good defensively. Like you mentioned, John, that young core they have, like you should, if you're a Patriots fan, feel really good about that. Offensively, I think there's reason for hope, but I think you gotta it's tepid hope, cautious hope, just because again, Drake May, you're relying on a young guy, rookie that you drafted. You don't know. Same thing with Jalen Pope, Javon Baker. You still have a question at offensive tackle, specifically left tackle. I think I would feel a lot better if they had signed Jonah Williams or Tyron Smith. I think I really would. But I will say I definitely feel better about this offense than I did in January, just based off them. They re-signed Hunter Henry, which is great. They re-signed Mike Onwenu, which is great. But then some of these young pieces, even if as long as the quarterback works out, they're fine. But even just with Jacoby Brissett starting this year, you're going to get better quarterback play than you did a year ago. And it feels like the offensive staff is more in sync. I think that was an underrated piece of their struggles last year. Yeah, they had Bill O'Brien, but those assistants he had were not really his assistants outside of Will Long. And it felt like they never meshed either, and he didn't trust them. I think now you have a full offensive staff, which, look, granted, in fairness, was not their first choice. We know that. But guys that are on the same page. And I think that's a good thing. Now you have a healthy Ramondre Stevenson as well. So I feel really good about the defense. I feel better about the offense, but I'm still a little cautious, and I got to see it.
Yeah, I mean, given how much they've invested on offense in the draft, part of what I feel like is shaping up for the Patriots with their extra cap money, which I don't think they're going to really use a whole lot of unless they extend some guys or restructure some contracts. I honestly think they might use some of that money to buy out some of the things that they're tethered to that came with the last Bill Belichick free agent signings. So I know I might be sort of jumping the gun here, but you draft two guys who are playing receiver for you. It's a really crowded receiver room. I think it's 11 guys right now.
Yeah.
I could see them using the leftover money that they have in the cap space to re-sign some guys, maybe pick up a couple of camp bodies, sign their rookies, and then buy out a contract like Juju Smith-Schuster's and say, you know what? No one wants this guy. He's taken up a roster spot. We'll just eat the money and we'll turn the page. And so if that's kind of the case where they're just kind of cleaning house after the draft, I'm okay with that because I think that they probably will see improvements from some of the rookies. Someone like Tyquan Thornton might show you something in camp that you can build off of. So I think Elliott Wolf is doing a pretty good job at redirecting where this team was going. And then also, I think, amending some of the poor decisions that they had in the past.
Yeah, and let's use that as kind of a jumping off point to the draft. Of course, it took place this weekend. It all started on Thursday night when the Patriots took Drake May, 3rd overall. And I want to start there, and then I just want to go Thursday, Friday, Saturday, get your thoughts on the picks, and then I want to talk about whether or not you see these guys or who do you see from this group that they're bringing in via the draft contributing this fall. But let's start with Thursday night. Obviously, I think we all called it pretty much every mock draft in America in recent weeks had the Patriots taking Drake May at 3. No-brainer pick, in my opinion. We talked about it last Tuesday night when we did our final mock draft. It was the right decision. I know there were a lot of people that talked about maybe wanting to trade down, and do you take J.J. McCarthy, or maybe you wait and you take a quarterback in the later rounds. One thing that I think was abundantly evident this weekend, guys, is that after those 6 guys got drafted on Thursday night, another quarterback didn't go until round 5, which I think speaks to what a lot of people, including myself, were saying about this quarterback class. And it was the top 6, and then there was a pretty noticeable drop-off. The rest of that class was more or less guys that had ability, but guys that were going to need time and may or may not work. I think that the guys that went in the first round were the right guys. But let's start with Drake May there. Just some final thoughts on that pick. I mean, it's been talked about all weekend. Let's be the ones to put a bow on it.
Yeah, look, I like the pick. I do think, though, he's going to need some time to develop behind Jacoby Brissett, right? And the 2 dates I look at, guys, Halloween and Christmas, right? So, look, if he's significantly better than Jacoby Brissett in August, fine, play him week 1. That's okay. But if not, sit him until Halloween. And if at that point he looks ready to go, then fine, play him the second half of the season. But if not, then check back in on Christmas. And if he's ready to go then, play him for the final couple weeks of the year so he can get some starting experience.
Which is what the Chiefs did with Patrick Mahomes his rookie year. He didn't
Yeah,
play
and
until
look,
the last game of the season.
And the caveat here is if the Patriots are in the playoff hunt at Christmas, then just stay with Jacoby Brissett, obviously. But those are the two dates I look at because I think like the footwork thing everyone points to, and that does need to be fixed. But this is also a guy like we've talked about this, and actually I thought Bill Belichick did a good job highlighting this on the McAfee show, how he comes off reads too early. I think part of that is just a comfort level thing, but we're also talking about a guy that 2 years ago in a college season got sacked 40 times. And last year in a college season, got sacked 29 times. And I know 29 sounds better than 40, but guys, that was on 90 fewer pass attempts. So he was still getting hit or rushed all the time. And I think he needs to just get comfortable to the speed of the NFL game. The Patriots offensive line is going to be okay, but I mean, it's probably not. There's still big question at left tackle and left guard. So I think it can be okay, but I don't think it's going to be great. So he's got to adjust to that, be ready to go. And then once he is ready, play him fine. But again, of the quarterback prospects, I like Jaden Daniels a lot. I like Drake May a lot. I'm happy they got May. I think he's a good fit for what they want to do as well. So I like it. I just want them to give him some time to marinate here.
Yeah, I think it was a no-brainer. It's kind of a no-loss situation for the Patriots to have taken him. I think if they had chosen someone else, then there's some second guesses if Drake May lights it up in the NFL at the pros. So I think it's a smart move for them. I'm glad they ended up taking him. I do wonder when it comes to playing him or not playing. I feel like a lot of people have sort of softened on the idea as to playing him. It seemed like initially everyone was like, oh, you got to sit this guy for, several months, where now you kind of hear people talking in the media and they're like, oh, maybe you could play him by week 3 or something. So I think he's probably going to blow Jacoby Brissett out of the water, especially in training camp, because he's just a much better physical specimen. So when I think about that, and also I was thinking about this when I was working out today, I wonder for the Patriots, if they have a pretty soft opening schedule, 4 games that seem pretty winnable, they're not going against world beaters like I know they play the 49ers and the Rams and some tough teams. I wonder if they're going against like the Titans and the Jags and like the Cardinals early in the season, they say, I don't know, go out and see how it goes, rather than sitting him for the games that are going to be his easiest and getting him acclimated. Depending on how the schedule shakes out and how he plays in training camp, I think by the time week 1 rolls around, it's going to be really obvious who the choice is.
Yeah, I love the pick. I've said that all weekend. He was the number 1 quarterback, in my opinion, in this class. I liked him better than Caleb Williams. I liked him better than Jaden Daniels. I think he has more upside than those 2 guys. I think you're more likely to get what people are comping him to, Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, than Caleb Williams to a Brett Favre or an Aaron Rodgers or Jaden Daniels. The Lamar Jackson comp is idiotic, but Deshaun Watson, C.J. Stroud, I think are more favorable comps for him. But my point is this. I think you took the right guy. Where you're at right now as an organization, you're a couple years away from competing again legitimately for a playoff spot and possibly a Super Bowl. You needed Drake May. You need a guy that you can bring along. Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, they're going to play right away. Drake May cannot play right away for a lot of the reasons that John just mentioned. He needs fundamental work. His pocket presence needs a lot of work. Belichick talked about him vacating reads too early and not staying within his field vision and working his eyes to his next read. He's got to do a better job than that. He's very frenetic in the pocket. He allows pressure to get to him because as a quarterback, your eyes have to stay downfield. You don't see pressure, you feel pressure. I think he feels it too much. And to your point, John, 2 years ago, which was his best season of the 2 years that he started in North Carolina, playing under then offensive coordinator Phil Longo, he got sacked 40 times. Now, he put up better numbers. Last year, as you said, John, he got sacked 29 times on 90 fewer snaps. Yeah. So from a rate standpoint, he probably got hit more. But it's one of those things where he is definitely more raw. And you can make the argument J.J. McCarthy might be more ready to play right now than Drake May. But they made the right decision. If you wait, if you trade down, if you accumulate picks and you try to cut corners and take a Spencer Rattler, or they did end up taking Joe Milton. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if you tried to cut corners and take one of those other guys, a Pratt, a Rattler, I just, for me, it wasn't going to work. You needed a talented quarterback to come in here that could potentially be your franchise quarterback. That was Drake May. They took the right guy. And I had somebody say to me before the draft, they're like, well, what about next year? Okay, well, what about next year? Carson Beck, not better than Drake May. Quinn Ewers, not better than Drake May. Shadur Sanders, not better than Drake May. Riley Leonard, comparable to Drake May, coming off an injury, transfer to Notre Dame. He might sneak into the first round. You're not getting 6 first-round quarterbacks next year. That's a much lesser quarterback class. So, the way I see it, it was the right pick, right move. And I love what Wolf said after the fact. You know what? He was our guy for a while. We've been locked in on him for the last few weeks. He was our guy. Yes, we entertained trade offers, but ultimately we're comfortable taking him. There was a consensus on Drake. I think it's a home run pick. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, I'm sure people are going to compare him to J.J. McCarthy and Bo Nix. You can't compare him to Williams and Daniels because they weren't there. Patriots couldn't take them. He will be compared obviously to McCarthy and Penix and Nix. Hopefully he has a better career than them. But you know what? Even if he's not the guy, and in 4 years he's not here, I'm okay with it. You swung for the fences. You tried to get your franchise quarterback. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. At least you tried. All right, now, night 2, they made 2 picks. They ended up making a trade that we had in our final mock draft last week, 34-37. With the Chargers, they dropped down 3 spots. They take wide receiver Jalen Polk from Washington, who I love. I actually had them taking him in the 3rd round in some of my mock drafts. I thought scheme-wise, 6'1", 203, pretty good fit for them. But in some of my earlier mock drafts, I should say, I had him going there. And then at pick 68 of the 3rd round, and this one raised some eyebrows, they took right tackle Caden Wallace from Penn State, guy who's played in 44 games, made 40 career starts. He's been terrific for the Nittany Lions. So let's talk about those 2 guys. Give me your thoughts on Jalen Polk and Caden Wallace.
Well, initially, I'll be honest. So I do like Polk, the player. I'll say that first. But initially, I was a little disappointed in the pick. And the reason I say that is I think they wanted Xavier Legette or Keon Coleman, and I wanted one of those 2 guys. And, of course, Legette goes 32 overall. Coleman goes 33, and then immediately the Patriots trade down from 34. And I look at Polk as, I think if he long-term is your wide receiver 2, you're in really good shape. And the reason I say wide receiver 2 is I think, look, he's been a wide receiver 2 at Washington. He was excellent in that role. But when you look at his snap breakdown, he played 59% of his snaps out wide. He played some X, played some Z, but he also played 41% of his snaps in the slot. So what that tells me is that when the Patriots try to get a bona fide number 1, whether it's later this offseason or next offseason, they can kind of pick whatever position they want, because if they want an X as their number 1, Polk can play Z. If they want a Z as their number 1, Polk can play X. If Javon Baker, who I know we'll talk about later, all of a sudden becomes a number 1 at X, well, Polk can play Z. But I think that versatility, and not just that he can line up at different spots, that he can be productive at different spots, I think that's a real asset. Because again, yes, I wanted Legette or Coleman, but Polk's a really good football player too. So they're getting a good football player there. And I know Patriots fans, myself included, have PTSD from 2nd-round wide receivers and really pretty much 80% of the wide receivers picked in the last 25 years. But I think this guy's good. And the last thing on him, the contested catch thing last year, he had, I think it was 13 contested catches in a college season. That would have been the most on the Patriots. Devontae Parker and Hunter Henry had 10. So already an upgrade there. And Caden Wallace, I think he's a really good player. I'm curious to see if he can transition to left tackle, or if they put on Wenu at left tackle, or what they do there. I think they're going to put a core of 4 at left tackle, let Wallace develop and eventually take over. But there's a lot to like about Wallace. He's played over 2,200 snaps in his career. He played really well against great competition, including Aiden Hutchinson. He's a great pass blocker, good run blocker. I just want to see how that transition goes. So again, I think both of these guys are good football players, and I like the picks, but I think the transition to the NFL, I think, is something to really monitor, especially with a guy like Wallace maybe moving positions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with both of the players. I think they're both going to be safe isn't a great word, but they are kind of safe play. Those are guys who are going to play in the NFL. That's one thing that I am confident about. Are they going to be high-end number 1 position? Probably not, but I think that's the reason that I was a little unhappy with the picks. Again, I think they're going to be good. I think that right now Jalen Polk is your number 2. Sorry, Pop Douglas. Sorry, everybody else. I think he's your number 2. And I honestly think Javon Baker, he might be your number one right now, as crazy as it sounds. But if they had selected those guys one selection further down, so let's say they take Drake May number one, number two goes to a mystery person, 3, 4, they go Polk and Wallace, I'd feel much better about it, just because I feel like you already took a big swing on Drake May. Adonai Mitchell was still on the board, and I know that he has attitudinal problems, and that could be sort of a problem down the line, but I would have preferred them to have taken a big swing at receiver too. I know that, if you take a big swing, you could strike out on it, but I think that if you're, maybe not planning on starting Drake May at the beginning of the season, why not get someone who has a higher ceiling up to speed a little bit earlier, or trading back even further from when they were, and then taking like Patrick Paul or something like that with that second pick and doing something like that maybe makes your offense a little bit more cohesive. I think they're building depth, which is a good thing, but I said it on the first show of the season. We have so much depth on this team. We have so many 2s and 3s and 4s. We really need the one. That's the one thing that I feel like they might have missed out on day 2.
Yeah, a lot to digest there from both of you guys. It's interesting because if you listen to Elliot Wolf's comments on Friday night, he talked about the fact that they don't really care about labeling their receivers, who's a number one, who's a number two, who's an X, who's a Z, who's an F. They don't really care about that. They want guys that can play the position and contribute. And that is, and again, I hate to beat the dead horse, that's Green Bay Packer-esque. I mean, when you look at the Packers of the 2010s, that was the composition of their receiving corps. You had Jordy Nelson, you had Greg Jennings, you had James Jones. Those guys were all highly productive players. And if you looked at that Packers team, you couldn't really say Jordy Nelson's their number one receiver or Greg Jennings is their number one receiver. You also had Jermichael Finley. So my point is, if he builds this roster the way he wants, that's how he's going to build it, where you have 2 highly productive receivers that could either – one could be considered their one, but they're producing at a high level. When I look at Jalen Polk and Javon Baker, I see 2 guys that are going to get you 800 to 1,000 yards and score 6 to 8 touchdowns a season. That's what they're going to get you if they're healthy. I really believe that they could be 1,000-yard receivers, maybe not do it every year, but do it enough that they're going to be productive, that they could be 2 of your primary targets in your passing game. And that's really what you want out of the West Coast offense. I know people will look at the 49ers in the 80s and say, well, Jerry Rice was their number one receiver, and he was. But let's not forget about how good John Taylor was. Let's not forget about how good Brent Jones was at tight end. The thing that makes that offense go, even this modern version of the West Coast offense, is the ball distribution, getting the ball to different guys that can do different things. And so I think that's got to be more the focus here. I don't have a problem with them passing on some of the receivers in the top of the second round. I wasn't a big Keon Coleman guy. Saw him play in person. Liked the size, liked the body control. Plays faster than he times, but he still doesn't get away from people as much as you'd like. And A.D. Mitchell, I mean, again, he played in a wide-open offense in Texas. Yeah, the attitude thing is a thing, but I wasn't in love with him either. I don't think, to me, that they're losing much by not drafting those 2 guys. Jalen Polk, to me, I thought had the best tracking skills of any receiver in this class. You throw him a slot fade, he can track that ball better than any receiver in this class, including Harrison and Neighbors. So, I like that pick a lot. I think he gives him some toughness. John, you mentioned the contested catch piece. Yep. I think he gives him some toughness in tough areas of the field. He's willing to compete in traffic. He has strong hands, wide catch radius, and as I mentioned, elite level tracking skills vertically. Now, Caden Wallace is the one pick that I think a lot of people were talking about Friday night and into Saturday. And I came out about 20 minutes before Wolf and said I thought he could play left tackle. And the reason I said that is simple. He's got enough length. He's got really good feet. He's really good on his vertical kick slide. He gets depth, and he does a really good job of cutting the edge off against speed guys and redirecting them back inside to a secondary move. And he does a really good job with his power set of engaging them when they go back inside and blocking them. Now, it's interesting because a lot of people said to me, well, if you can play left tackle, why wasn't he their left tackle? Well, because the left tackle was Ola Fashanu, who was arguably the best offensive tackle in this class going into 2023.
10th overall pick, yeah.
Right, exactly. The Jets took him 11th overall. So
11th, excuse me.
Yeah. At the end of the day, that was the guy opposite him. That's the only reason he wasn't the starting left tackle. So, I think for me, I can see why people would second guess that pick. I know that they liked him a lot. There were a lot of people. I talked to a couple of people that said to me that he is a target of theirs. They see him as a guy that can make that move over. And I think that's going to be the play. One quick thing that I do want to point out, and again, I come back to the West Coast offense because I feel that one of the things that's been lost, and not to jump on my soapbox real quick, one of the things that I think gets lost this time of year, in my opinion, is, and this is just an old man sitting on my lawn chair yelling at young people to get off my draft lawn. But I've been doing this 24 years, and the thing that really bothers me about this industry now is people are more concerned about being right than they are about informing fans. And I have a real problem with that. And that's something I try to do, because what really gets me is that if you look at the way the West Coast offense operates, okay, they cross-train their guys to play multiple positions. That's a staple of West Coast offense line play. Packers have done it with Elgin Jenkins and Zach Tom now. You go back to the Niners of the 80s, Jesse Sapolo could play guard and center. Guy McIntyre can play guard and tackle. You cross-train your linemen to play multiple positions. Again, I can't stress this enough. Elliott Wolf is the son of Ron Wolf, Mike Holmgren. These are guys that drafted a quarterback at least every other year. These are guys that drafted offensive linemen that were slightly undersized because they wanted them to play multiple positions. So that's what he's doing. That's the formula that he's using here. So Caden Wallace, to me, not a surprise in round 3. All right, let's go to day 3. Obviously, the pick that everybody seems to love is Javon Baker in the 4th round. But before they took Javon Baker, they took Layden Richardson. Let's start there. Some thoughts on what they did day 3.
Yeah, Layden Robinson, guard out of Texas A&M.
What did I say, Richardson?
Yeah.
No, Robinson, yes.
Robinson. And look, what I found interesting, and similar to Caden Wallace, right? I mentioned Caden Wallace had 2,290 snaps, all at right tackle. Well, Layden Robinson had 2,100 snaps, which is a lot, but all at right guard. And it's like you have City So there.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder, though, is there uncertainty with Cole Strange? And would they move City So to left guard? Would they just put Robinson at left guard? And I think initially Robinson will be a developmental piece, and they'll see, much like Antonio Mafi probably is right now, that guy behind So and Strange and Andrews. But I mean, they got to look at it where David Andrews might not be there next year. So is it Jake Andrews or is it Mafi? Is it Robinson? They want to eventually be the center. Cole Strange, I mean, he was pretty good towards the end of last year before he got hurt, but he was really inconsistent last year, and he got hurt, and he was a reach to begin with in 2022. So, what are they thinking of Cole Strange's future there? That kind of signaled that to me. He's right now a depth piece, but I think he could become more than that. He needs more consistency too. You see him get kind of blown back on pass rushing snaps a lot, and not that he can't block those guys, he can, but it's just sometimes he's too high, and you see him get really knocked back. Javon Baker, I know everyone's loving Javon Baker. I like him a lot. He did it. It was kind of weird. He had 6 drops this year, but none in the last 5 games. And he was also great with contested catches. I think he's a true X. I think if he pops, and Jake, you kind of mentioned this earlier, if he really develops, he could be their number 1 receiver. But if he doesn't, I think it could be something that really flames out quickly. I think he's a real boomer bust guy. You look at the yards per catch, the athleticism. There was some of those whispers that when he left Alabama, it was because he wasn't getting the ball enough. So I think he could be a boom or bust type guy. But those two guys,
drops are a real problem with him. He had over 20 in his 2 years at Central Florida.
And you wonder, did he clean that up? The last 5 games he had none, or did he just have a good 5-game stretch and that's going to rear its ugly head come September, October, November? So he's a guy that I think could be really boom or bust. But in the 4th round, I do like both of them. That's what you're going to do in the 4th. You take a guy in Layden Robinson who's probably going to play for you. It might take some development. And then a few picks later, you take a boom or bust guy that if he works at pick 110, you really love it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with Javon Baker that is interesting is that it's an unfortunate product of the X position for a lot of guys. It's way easier to be an X receiver who looks like a bust because you're on those vertical passes, your deep posts, all that kind of stuff where if it's not working for you, you're not going to get the stuff under the middle like a Jacoby Myers used to. And he'd put up great season stats, and you'd say, wow, this guy's incredibly productive. Was he the best player on the field at that point? No, and he's a great 3rd right now over in Vegas. So the thing about Baker is that it could look really bad at the beginning, or it could look really good in the beginning, just dependent on, who's able to be getting him the ball on the outside, and if he is able to keep those concentration catches, within himself. I like Layden Robinson. I think it's an indication that they aren't really sold on what they have in the guard play, which is interesting because that was a thing that Elliot Wolf was talking about earlier before the draft in a press conference. He said, oh yeah, we've got a lot of guys who are progressing well that we think can start for us. So was he kind of lying through his teeth there, or is this kind of, to your point, John, a little bit more of an indictment on Cole Strange, who he didn't mention by name during the press conference? So I don't know. I think that Strange just needs a little bit more time. I think he gets so much more hate because he was a first-round pick. If he was a third-round guy for us, we'd be like, oh yeah, this guy's, he's Shaq Mason of the future. Like, we would be totally fine with him like that, but there's a little bit of like an over-analyzation, I think, of his game, just given the position he was put in replacing Shaq Mason. The guy that I do want to get to, and I might be jumping the gun, Marcellus Dial, I love him. I think he's going to be more than just a special teams guy and more than a slot guy. I think that he brings physicality. He is decent size, about 5'11 and a half. He played, I think, almost 450 snaps in coverage last year. He played in the SEC. I think that he's going to end up being someone in camp who really pops, and someone who, given the talent around Christian Gonzalez on the outside, I think is someone who could actually play maybe even week one for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at Layden Robinson, it's an interesting pick to me because it doesn't fill a need, but I also think it's an indictment pick. It's an indictment on what they have. Now, City So played pretty well last year. Kind of gets lost in the fact that he was a rookie and they went 4-13. He did struggle early, but he played pretty well the second half of the year, and he's a swing guy to me. I think he can play guard or right tackle potentially if you decide to move Mike Onwenu around, although I don't see that happening. I think he's going to be their right tackle for the 3 years he's signed to. The guy to keep an eye on is Cole Strange, because Strange is interesting in the sense that he's 6'4", 315 pounds. He's got enough length that he could potentially play tackle for you. And part of me had this crazy thought the other day where could they potentially give him some left tackle reps? Here we are talking about cross-training offensive linemen. He could potentially play tackle for them. I think that him and Mafi are the two guys that I think are going to get the most competition out of Robinson. They're the two guys that I think are going to need to really step up and compete. I think they do see Andrews as a possible replacement to Andrews. They like City So, but I think it's Mafi and Strange that are going to have to beat out Robinson for playing time. But there's no question that obviously when they look at the composition of that position, that they don't feel that they have enough there. Otherwise, you don't invest a fourth-round pick in Layden Robinson. Now, Javon Baker is interesting to me. You see the three-level playmaking ability. You can use him on perimeter screens. You can use him on jet and fly sweeps even. Reverses. He can be a threat in the middle of the field. He's a vertical threat. He can do a lot. I think the big thing with him is going to be consistency, catching the football. As I mentioned, he had over 20 drops the last 2 years. He's got to do a better job in that department. He brings swagger to the room, something they haven't had since Randy Moss was here. I know Julian Edelman gave you some of it, but Julian Edelman was a heart and soul tough guy. He wasn't really a swagger type. This guy gives you legitimate big play swagger, something that they desperately, need in this offense. But I do think, and I think it is important, I do think that he could potentially play the X, but here we are talking about Drake May and bringing him along slowly. Kind of think you got to bring these receivers along slowly too. You can't just throw them in there and hope that they produce. They're going to need some time to develop as well. I know a lot of people mentioned the Jacoby Myers comp to Jalen Polk. I don't see that. I think Polk's a better vertical receiver than Jacoby Myers was. I think Myers was really good short to intermediate. I think Polk's a better three-level receiver. Real quick, I didn't read the comment. Alex Agrella checks in. Thanks for checking in, Alex. That's an interesting take on my earlier point about Riley Leonard possibly being a first-rounder. Yeah, I think he's got first-round size and first-round skill. Just a matter of him getting healthy this offseason and producing at Notre Dame. Of course, he transferred from Duke to Notre Dame. When you look at that quarterback class next year, one thing you could say about it is there's some legitimate size in that class. There's not a lot. There's no Bryce Youngs in that class. Let's finish up here, day three, real quick. Thoughts on the other picks? I know that Jake mentioned Marcellus Dial. I like that pick as well. They're a corner short, so he will have an opportunity to play a lot early, assuming he makes the team. Will play on special teams as well. Pick everybody's talking about is the other 6th round pick, and of course that's Joe Milton. Give me the thoughts here on Joe Milton. I was on that call on Saturday. He's an interesting kid. It's so hard for me because part of me loves this effing pick. Then there's a part of me that's like, could they have gone somewhere else here? And could that somewhere else have helped them potentially? Your thoughts?
Look, if he can develop into your long-term backup, then as a 6th round pick, that's a good pick, right? And I know that's not what everyone wants as a headliner, but having an actual good backup quarterback is really valuable. I mean, look at the 2023 Patriots. If their backup was good, Mac Jones wouldn't have played that long. So, having a good backup is valuable. And with Milton, look, he needs a lot of development, okay? If you put him on the field right now, he'd be a terrible NFL quarterback. He needs development, especially with his accuracy. But if there's a guy who's going to be a developmental guy who was a leader at Tennessee, he was a Man of the Year semifinalist in college football. So he's got great character. He's going to come in and learn. So again, if he's your long-term backup, I'm fine with that pick there. I think he can be a good NFL backup maybe, but he does need a lot of development. But right now he's your 4th guy. You have Zappe, you have Brissett, you have Drake May, even Nathan Warwick. I mean, he's really your 5th guy. He's probably going to be on the practice squad this year, which is fine. I think this is a pick for 2025, 2026 as your potential backup. And if it works out that way, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and to that point, if this is going to be your backup of the future, I don't know why you wouldn't swing for the fences on the guy who has the physical attributes that's going to be a higher end backup than, we were talking about Keaton Slovis.
He was the best available quarterback, in my opinion, of that bottom half of that group. I liked him the best. Mm-hmm. I really did. Yeah. And I'm partial to the big, tall quarterbacks, but 6'5", 245, he might have the strongest arm in all of football. I don't think there's a guy in all of football that has as strong in his arm as him. That includes Mahomes and all these other guys.
Yeah, and I think that for that reason alone, why wouldn't you take the guy who has the highest upside? We're talking about Keaton Slovis, a couple of those other guys. I want to always call him Clayton Tune. Who's the guy from Michael Pratt? Those guys will be backups, but wouldn't you rather have the backup who's just one iota better than them in terms of their physical attributes, in case a guy who is physical and who does get mixed up in it, like Drake May, gets injured? All right, well, 2 years down the line, if you're a good team and Drake May's out for 2 weeks or something, and you can put Joe Milton in, he can throw at a county mile, great. Awesome. That's great. So I don't really have a problem with the pick because I think that of the backups available, he would have been the best option. But I do wonder if you could have maybe gotten a receiving back or another tight end or another tackle, someone else to kind of take a flyer on while you were still in the 6th round. So I just wonder that, given the fact that you already have 4 quarterbacks on the roster, including Drake May.
Yeah, I liked the pick from that standpoint. I think to your point, you can develop him. Could be a backup. Could be a potential trade chip. Again, Elliott Wolf tapping into his father's playbook. Him and Mike Holmgren did that for years in Green Bay. Even when they had Don Mikowski, Brett Favre, they would draft a quarterback every other draft. I'm a firm believer in that. I think you should do that. At least every other year you should take a quarterback at some point, either day 2 or day 3, because it's a position of importance. But I firmly believe in what Mike Holmgren used to believe in, which is you can develop them to keep them, or you can develop them to trade them. They can be a trade chip for you. And I think Joe Milton could potentially be a trade chip for them down the road. He was asked if he would consider playing tight end, and the look on his face said it all. He has zero interest in playing tight end. He sees himself as a quarterback. And you know what? I see him as a quarterback too. I know it's easy to say, 6'5", 245, he can run. Maybe he can move to tight end. Remember, Bill Polian and others were saying these things about Lamar Jackson in 2018. So don't judge a book by its cover. The kid's a quarterback. He can play quarterback in this league. It's a matter of whether or not he's going to get that opportunity here. Chances are he's probably not. But I'm with you, Jake, from the standpoint that only concern I have with them not using this pick somewhere else is you could have filled another need. Running back is more of a need for them than I think a lot of people are willing to admit. I was a little surprised that they didn't take a back in this draft. But, hey, if nothing else, training camp's going to be fun this year between him and Drake May having throw-offs, and they'll probably do the stupid barrel thing, and the fans are oohing on. It'll be fun if nothing else.
Bring your oranges.
Bring your oranges. That's right. Yeah. Good reference here. Chris Price of the Globe asked him about that the other day. And then in the 7th round, they took tight end Jaheim Bell out of Florida State. Saw Jaheim play last year against BC, 5 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown in that game. He's a move you tight end. He's not an inline guy. He's a guy that probably will have to play special teams and probably playing 13 personnel or 14 personnel to get reps. Could make the team. It'll come down to him and Mitchell Wilcox, who they signed as a free agent a couple weeks ago. All right, last segment here real quick. Let's long-term forecast here, okay? Let's look ahead to this upcoming season. Which of these guys that they picked this past weekend, which of these guys you think will have the biggest impact?
I think it's Jalen Polk because I think he's going to play all year, and his versatility to line up at different spots. Because Alex Van Pelt, his offense in Cleveland last year, I think was top 5 in usage of 11 personnel. So they have 3 receivers on the field all the time. So I think his ability to line up at different spots, I think he's going to end up playing the most and having the most impact.
Yeah, I'll just go with a different player to avoid agreeing with you. I think it probably will be Polk, but I'm going to stick to my guns. I do think it's going to be Dial. I think that they're just so weak at corner on the outside that he's the kind of guy who could make some plays, turn some heads. I don't know that he's going to be like a top-graded Pro Football Focus guy if you're all into that, but he's physical enough. He'll make tackles, and I do think that he will be able to break up passes along the boundary with his size.
Yeah, he'll dial up some pass breakups for sure. I couldn't help
Just not checkers.
I'm going to go with Caden Wallace. I think he's going to play a lot more than people think. I think he could find his way as the left tackle eventually. I think he's more than capable of playing over there. I stated the reasons why I think that earlier. But for me, I think Jalen Polk, I'm with you, John. I think he's going to make an instant impact. You hope Javon Baker can as well. But I think Caden Wallace is going to play more than people think. And I think he's going to be a more integral part of this offensive line than people think. I know they like Okorafor, and I think he's going to get the first shot at it. But I do think Caden Wallace is going to push him in camp. And I do think ultimately Caden Wallace will, if nothing else, and it's a long season, injuries are a name of the game. If nothing else, he's going to play because of that. But I do think he has a pretty good shot at playing right away. Final quick question here for you guys. Are you pleased enough with the job that Elliot Wolf did this weekend that you think he should be hired as the full-time general manager?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I think even though I liked, Xavier Legette more than Jalen Polk, and I wish they could have, he picked good football players, and I think they're going to be part of hopefully a nice young core, and the Barmore extension I like a lot as well. And I think, honestly, if you're the Crafts and you just let this dude make the 3rd overall pick and then you don't hire him as GM, that's nuts. So, yeah, I do. I think he's earned that. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Time will tell if these guys actually end up working out. But the fact that they went so offense heavy does show that he knows what this team needs. It's not another Belichick thing, taking 2 special teamers, a bunch of defenders, and then leaving the offense out to dry. I think that he's identifying the needs, and we're just hoping that he identified the best players.
I think he did a really good job. Time will tell how good a job he did. But I agree with both you guys. He deserves a shot to run his own organization. Kind of got screwed in Green Bay. Brian Gutekunst has done a good job. I think a lot of people thought because of the last name he was going to be the heir apparent. He didn't end up getting it. Went to Cleveland. He got more experience. He's been ready for this opportunity, and I think he deserves this opportunity. And I think he's got the right temperament. We talk about having the right people follow a legend. Well, I think he's done a great job on the player personnel side of following Bill Belichick. It wasn't that hard to do given the last few years. But more of that will be about Gerard Mayo. But I do think he deserves this opportunity. He's experienced. He was born for this, if you will. I think that it'd be smart if the Crafts gave him that opportunity. And John, I'm with you all the way, man. Why would you let him take the most important draft pick since Drew Bledsoe? Why would you let him make that pick if he's not going to be your guy long term? It's asinine to think that they could say, thanks for making the pick, but we're moving on. I think ultimately he's going to be the guy. Remember, though, the Crafts have never hired a general manager. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't know if he'll actually have that title. We shall see. All right, gentlemen, great job this offseason getting our fans out there ready for the draft. Appreciate you guys and what you do. We're going to be off now until training camp, but we'll be back with more Patriots Pulse episodes for you then. You got the Bruins, the Celtics in the playoffs. It's a busy time of year. We know that that's where your focus is, but we will be back this summer getting you ready for the upcoming season. So, gentlemen, thanks again for dedicating your time the last few weeks.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. And like I said, big part of me is just happy the draft is finally over.
So am I.
Yeah.
So am I. I've never written
as fun as it is. I'm just, we've been talking about the draft since Mac Jones threw that pick in Germany. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Since he threw the first pick 6 against Dallas. This was long before then even. But
I
it's
agree.
been a lot of fun. Looking forward to having a chat a little bit later on when these guys are in some shells and in some pads.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it as well. Always great talking ball with you guys. You guys are the best. Appreciate you and appreciate your time. That'll do it for this episode of Patriots Pulse. For John Lyons, Jake Hamilton, I'm John Sarianides. We'll talk to you this summer as the Patriots go to training camp. Until then,